Good people of the Grove, I know what you're thinking. Man, why are we doing growth groups on back-to-back weeks here with teen growth groups? And I hope and pray for the adults as well. Well, just so happens that we had to readjust the schedule due to spring break, and so this is just hitting us at this time. And so here we are, back-to-back weeks. It's all good. We'll get going. We are now in Exodus chapter 5, and this time we'll go 5, 6, and then the first part of 7 all the way to 7:13. So if you're following along in the guided reading and the bookmark and everything else, that's what we're covering in this video for our growth groups. As a reminder, look, here's the deal. I just want to put this before you. We have like a few things that we do at the Grove. Sunday gathering, of course. Neighborhood groups, of course. Growth groups, I would say, of course. Growth groups are really where you're reading the Word. Neighborhood groups are where you're learning to be family, you're learning to be missionaries. But man, to learn to be a student of the Word, my prayer is that you would do so in growth groups, not just to understand it, but to become someone that you aren't currently. And that only happens through obedience. So don't just read this stuff just to learn it. Read it to learn it and then to obey it. And that's going to be a main theme that we unpack here in these few chapters. So remember, what does this say about God? What does this say about me? And then what must I do as a result? Those are the three questions that we usually ask as we kind of just glance through the scriptures as we read and study in growth groups. So here we go. We'll try and make these shorter video today and we're off. Like, what does this say about God? Well, multiple things. And I think the book of Exodus is going to be a little bit tricky for us because it might feel a little repetitive. But I think that there's some texture and some layer to the things that we're going to unpack week by week. I would say this: He allows stubbornness of heart. My kids and I were all reading the book of Exodus. We're reading it with Moses as well. And he's asked, we're a little bit ahead in Exodus right now than where we are in growth groups. But he asks like constantly, why does the Lord keep hardening his heart? And if you read the scriptures, it says very clearly that he hardens his heart so that he can show his power and his patience. And I don't know about you, but that gives me great comfort. And so our God will allow certain things, allow difficulty, allow stubbornness, allow Pharaoh to dictate more difficulty for the Israelites, not so that he can test the character of his people. He knows the character of his people. But rather, we might understand his character. Some might say we test his character in that way. And indeed, you see this throughout the scriptures, and we'll unpack that a bit as we go. So I think, first and foremost, God allows difficulty, he allows suffering, he allows stubbornness, so that he can show his power. If for no other reason, he makes it really difficult and hard on Pharaoh, so that he can show he's even more powerful than him eventually. I think that we can also see in this passage, in chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, that our God is a covenanting God. He knows exactly what the people of Israel are like. He knows they don't believe Moses. He knows that they will turn their back on him in the wilderness with the golden calf eventually in Exodus 32. He knows exactly who they are. And yet he says, if you really look at this, it's marriage language in chapter 6, verse 6 through 8, which says this. He says, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you." There it is. Here comes the marriage language. "I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people. And I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians." What a beautiful picture that God is a marriage God, he's a covenanted God, and he's committed to our good, and he will love us really no matter what. That is a really beautiful picture. I just wonder if you'd ponder on that this week, that my God is committed to me no matter my performance. My God is committed to me no matter how apathetic I become in my love for him and my commitment to him. He's committed. He's covenanted. Like a marriage, like a husband to a wife and a wife to a husband, that they will never give up on each other. That's the picture of Christ's love for his church. And what a beautiful picture it is right here in Exodus 6. And then finally, I alluded to this, but chapter 7, verse 12 will show that he's more powerful than any other. When Aaron's staff swallows up the snakes of the magicians, the subtle reality. I mean, our God is way more powerful, even the mysterious, magical world of ancient Egypt. And so I don't know about you, but when you go to like the museum and everybody's oohing and awing over Egypt, I'm just sitting there going, I mean, our God defeated all of this. And what a great picture that is right there in that passage. All right, what does it say about me? What does it reveal about humanity and me in particular? Well, you know, I don't like to identify myself with Pharaoh, but I have to admit, the question in all of our hearts is right there in chapter 5 and 2. Chapter 5, verse 2. Where Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, hey, I need you to let my people go. And the question in all of our hearts, really at the heart of whether or not we're going to obey him or not, is articulated right there by Pharaoh. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I don't know him, it says. I will not let it, I don't know the Lord. And moreover, I will not let them go. That's the heart of obedience, y'all. The heart of obedience is whether or not you truly know the Lord. If you don't know him, you will not see him as magnificent and mighty, and you will not want to obey. And if you say it another way, if I don't want to obey Jesus, you have to start to wonder on whether or not you know him. And I don't know where you are in your walk. Maybe you're just kind of getting used to this whole idea of obedience to Jesus, but let me implore you that if you look back at a long track record of your life, your obedience will be whether or not you truly knew him or not. And maybe you don't know him at all, but maybe you just forgot about how mighty he really is in moments of relapse. But the heart of obedience is whether or not we truly know him as the Lord our God. It's a relationship, of course. Secondly, Moses does a crazy thing in chapter 5, verse 22. If you read it, it says this. Really a fascinating question that I wonder if you would resonate with you. Then Moses turned to the Lord when all this affliction was happening. Pharaoh makes it more difficult for the Israelites. He goes to the Lord and he says this, "O Lord, why have you done evil to this people?" I don't know what your circumstances do to you when things don't turn out right, when things are really difficult, when it seems like you just can't catch a break. But if you go to the Lord and maybe accuse him of evil, may we count it a grace that if we've ever done that, maybe we'd say, oh, I've never done that. I think we looked real hard in our hearts. We might find some times where we've at least thought that, like, are you doing evil here, Lord? What's going on? You can't seem to make right of some injustices in the world or in your history, your story. Number one, we have good company with Moses. But number two, God doesn't strike Moses down and he's gracious. He's got a bigger plan for Moses and the Israelites than to just prove a point. And we serve a gracious God that will allow us to go into some really treacherous parts of our prayer life. And he's patient with us, and we're really grateful for that. But we will do this from time to time and maybe misappropriate the character of God if we don't quite understand the fullness of his plan. That's the second thing that I think it reveals about us. Sometimes we go to dark places. Thirdly, we become stubborn and practical when we don't see a way for whatever God says to do. We don't see a way for that to work. And so, all throughout like 6:12, 6:30, 7:6, you see Moses going to the Lord and be like, I can't do this. I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. I don't really belong here, and I really shouldn't be doing this anyways. It's not going to work anyways. And so what are we doing? He's really practical, gets really stubborn when he sees difficulty and failure before him. And I don't know about you, but I like to succeed. I don't like to be put on missions by God that are destined to fail. Like, hey, go talk to Pharaoh. And oh, by the way, he's not going to listen to you. And we will get stubborn and practical, and that's hardly the point. You see, instead, what we must do about this, the first thing that we must do about this is that we have to obey even when we don't see the point. Because our obedience, again, is rooted in our knowledge of the Lord as our God and our Savior. It's rooted in relationships. So we must obey even when we don't see the point. Secondly, what must I do? We stay obedient because of the relationship. Right there, chapter 7, verse 3, right? That this is what is happening. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, like, it's going to get hard. It's going to get difficult. but we obey because we are in relationship with him, and that has spanned a story of genealogies, just as it did in chapter 6. Finally, what must I do? Well, chapter 6, verse 9, again, chapter 7, verse 3 that I just read. We are tasked with difficult and sometimes impossible tasks, but that doesn't mean that we don't faithfully, trusting in our God, do it. So I don't know what God's calling you to do this week. I don't know what he's calling you to do in the next week. I don't know what he's been knocking on your door to make sure that you don't forget that he called you to do last year. But may we be a people that do not count success and failure on end results. May we be a people that count success and failure on doing the things that God calls us to do, whether we feel like it or not, whether we think it's going to succeed or not, but instead simply because we know who the Lord is and we trust his voice as we go. I love y'all. Can't wait to see you Sunday.